Hello and welcome to Butzel's AI Institute. Today we're going to be looking at navigating the generative AI landscape, opportunities and risks demystified. This is our introductory session to introduce you to the generative AI field, to get you conversational with some of the keywords that you'll hear, and to lay that groundwork that we'll use in future sessions to dive deeper by industry or by use. So my name is Angela Shapiro. I am a litigation shareholder here at Butzel, and a great deal of my practice revolves around electronic discovery, which has been in the AI world for quite some time now and is fully embracing generative AI as well. I sit on the firm's technology committee as well as the AI task force. I also am on the board for some technology-related organizations in the legal field, and I really love this stuff. So I'm looking forward to speaking about it today. And with me, I have Claudia Rast, who will introduce herself in just one moment, as well as Barrett Young, both attorneys, colleagues here at Butzel Long. Claudia, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Angela. And yes, we do live and breathe this stuff, don't we? Yeah, so my name is Claudia Rast. I am also a shareholder here at Butzel. My practice area, I'm the practice department chair of the Intellectual Property, Cybersecurity, and Emerging Tech Group, which fields a bunch of nerd attorneys that aren't doing it in litigation. Because we all consider ourselves sort of the nerd attorneys in this geeky world of artificial intelligence and other things. My background is in science, so this is where I have been living and breathing for a long time. In addition to my work in the firm with emerging tech, artificial intelligence, all things cyber data breaches, I've also been spending a lot of time with the American Bar Association, recently leaving a 3-year co-chair position with the Cybersecurity Legal Task Force, where we introduced and was passed a resolution on AI for the American Bar Association. And that group recently spoke with Senator Schumer's office on the proposed legislation for artificial intelligence, and also have been working with various states, including, of course, Michigan, on privacy, data protection, and artificial intelligence. And so we stay busy with these geeky things. How about you, Barrett?
I'm Barrett Young. I'm an associate at the firm. I'm in our litigation group. I'm also on the technology committee and the AI task force. And like my two colleagues here, I love this stuff. I've been interested in computers and computer science ever since I was just a wee lad. So
There we go. Shall we launch?
We shall launch. Okay, so we'll jump ahead here, kind of skip slides there a little bit, but none of them substantive, so we'll go with it. We're going to start by hearing from Claudia, who, as she mentioned, is a leading voice on all things data security, data privacy, and just on data anything really. But
Give me data. Give me data.
She's going to take us back and give us that really that first groundwork we need, which is to understand what is generative AI and where did it come from?
Which is really important, Angela, because so many times we get questions about, I want to use this or I want to use that. And without understanding what it is and how it works, people really can be going down a rabbit hole or some dangerous paths. So let's go to the Turing test. Alan Turing, this goes back to the 50s, when he was talking about what artificial intelligence or what computers could not do. They could not be kind, resourceful, beautiful. I love the eating strawberries and cream, falling in love. Although there was that chat GPT instance where the New York Times reporter, I think, had a conversation, and the chat GPT was trying to tell him to leave his wife and join the artificial intelligence. Well, that's not really falling in love. But the machines can do more than what Alan Turing had identified as a real test. And so moving into that next thing, yes, we have some transition. Google Duplex had a process where it could place phone calls and introduced various kinds of developments in 2018. The machine scheduled a hair salon appointment, but all of a sudden, some of these things came and went. Some believe they passed the Turing test, others said no. And in December 22, Google shut down Duplex. The thing to keep in mind as we move to the next slide is we have been dealing with AI, forms of AI for many years. Angela, I recall when we were doing predictive analytics and it was new,
Yep.
the whole idea of doing discovery as opposed to, and you'll appreciate this, Barrett, because back in the day when I was with another law firm, we would spread paper on the floor and try to figure out the patterns and what.
Baker's
happened.
boxes, right? In a warehouse. Oh, yes. The good old days.
Yes, what you have missed and not doing that associate work, mind numbing. So that's the idea of the computer assisted in discovery has been around. We know what Amazon does when you buy something and they say, would you like to buy this? Or Google search engine that says, you've looked here, would you like to look there? Or these are the search results. Netflix with movies, Pandora, Spotify, all these use some form of AI. So how do we break that down? What are the kinds of AI that we need to look at? And AI, as we said, has been around for a long time. And machine learning, that's also been around for a long time. We remember back in the 90s with the auto industry, robots, taking over those line positions. And you're programming the robots to do certain kinds of things that they will do accurately and minimize errors. Well, then we had deep learning that came in, and that was where, and this is the predictive analytics where we had, you have machine learning, you have minimized errors, but then you want to have human interaction to really reduce those errors, to provide insight into that. And then we all of a sudden launch into neural networks. Now, this is the black box. This is the real mystery area. And I think we have a picture of a neural network in the next slide. But before we get there, the real challenge was in going back to deep learning and predictive analytics, where you have a very linear kind of approach in language. Okay, what's that next word? What's that next word? What happened is this idea of a transformer. And we'll see that in the next slide, where no longer is it linear, but it's in this matrix. So if we go to that next slide, you'll see at the bottom right-hand corner, this idea, it's 2D, but imagine it as a 3D box. And that's the huge transformation in these large language models, where not only were you predicting in a straightforward linear fashion, but you had this huge whole trove to decide from. The speed of which computers could work and also the storage capacity made a huge difference there. And then you get to the next slide, which shows that how generative AI is different. And that's in the neural networks that I mentioned, where you have huge, vast troves of large language models. And we'll get a little bit into that issue and what those large language models are in improving the output. But the real, as we've talked about, the more data you have, the better statistical significance you have in the predictions, because you can weed out, you can learn, you can train, and so forth. And as we had increased ability to process and increased ability to store, that gave rise with the large language models to generative pre-trained transformers, or GPT, chat GPT, which happened, gosh, that was, how long has it been? It's been at least 2 years at this point
Well,
that it first launched. It blew up last year
yes.
of November of 2022.
Right, on data that had been trained through the 6 months earlier than
right.
that. So our current generation that we're using now, 4, is about a year and a half
About a year and a half
old
yeah.
at this point.
Which is also interesting to point out. One of the issues, just explaining the neural network, though, if you think of of input here and output here, the neural network is kind of in here with zeros and ones, making decisions. And even those who do this stuff, the engineers, are not sure how those decisions are made in that neural network. And there have been those that have described it like playing a slot machine. Every time you pull the lever, you get a different result. And then we see, ChatGPT. Here's an example of what is generative AI, giving you a very formal response. And then you can say, okay, so give it to us in a more conversational tone. All right, we can do that. And there we have a more conversational tone. So that's where it comes from. That's how it's developed. And these are some examples of currently the AI tools and platforms that are out there.
There's
many choices.
It's amazing when we're talking about Chat GPT-4, which is kind of the big boy that's out there at the moment, although there are challengers and they're coming up quick. But what's interesting to me is I'll throw an example out there, Claude 3, which has a couple of different, three different levels of performance, really, or maybe it's audiences, but the Claude 3, the largest and the slowest model is Opus. And Opus is currently ranking above Chat GPT-4 in many of the industry rankings as being the current champion when it comes to output. But think about that, because we were just talking about how Chat GPT-4 is already old technology in this arena, and OpenAI is working on what a lot of people are calling Chat GPT-5, although we don't know if that's what it will actually be called. And it's kind of amazing if you think about the possibilities of what might be incorporated in that next iteration from OpenAI, or in the incremental pieces we're going to see rolled out before the next big one. And we know that's going to happen because they've told us that's going to happen. So,
I mean, we're in a very dynamic and transformative phase right now. And, and Barrett will go into how is it being used today in terms of what are people doing, and how are they using it? And whether, is it going to replace all humans? I don't think so, but it will certainly replace certain activities.
So Barrett, can you talk to us about how generative AI is being used today?
I'd be happy to. So what most folks have probably seen in terms of generative AI today is probably using it to generate text. So you might go to ChatGPT, you might go to Google Bard, you might go to Microsoft Copilot, you type in a prompt, and then it gives you back some text. And one of the really materially different things about it is that you give it natural language, i.e. the way humans speak, not the way a computer programmer speaks, or not the way a software engineer speaks, but you just type in your input, your text, the way you would just talk to another person. And up on the screen, we have different examples going to those three services, and you can see putting in similar inputs will give you different outputs across platforms, but also even within the same platform, you could get different responses. And companies are leveraging this to make chatbots and virtual assistants. So you might have gone to your bank's website on your phone or on your computer, and you might have a question, and you can type in, you could say, hey, what have I been spending money on this month? Or show me my recurring charges for, your Netflix, your, any number of things, your Amazon Prime, and it could show you like over time, rather than calling the bank, rather than emailing the bank. You can just go right there, type in your query, and get a natural human language response back. So that's probably how most people have interacted with it so far.
So that's that query that you type in, which you see in the examples on the screen now, where in one sentence describe how well you can generate text. That's a prompt, right? So when we hear people talking about prompts,
And prompt engineering.
that's what it is, right? Okay, so I just want to since we are talking to people maybe who are new to generative AI, as we're going through and talking about these various tools, most of them are available for you to get in and try and to play with. And those prompts are really important. Barrett mentioned prompt engineering. There's an entire industry, new profession that has sprung up around creating really quality prompts that get you the outputs that you actually are looking for and need. And I was just yesterday looking around, there are now prompt libraries or prompt galleries that most of the AI companies out there are publishing. And while they say they're for use with their tools, truly, if it's good in one, it's going to be good in the other. So those are really valuable resources that are out there for free. Once you do start playing around with generative AI, reference those, use those to help you springboard into helping these tools do what you want them to do.
But be careful what you input.
But be careful. We are going to get to that. We are going to get to that. Be careful what you
Be careful
input.
what you input. That we'll definitely get to that. And then also be very mindful of what you get back, because the tools are not evaluating the correctness or accuracy in general. They're just trying to predict what you want. So for instance, if you're on your phone, like my name is Barrett, somebody might be on their phone, want my phone number. They start typing BAR. The phone might think, oh, you want Barry, and it would return that. That wouldn't be right in that moment because that person would actually want Barrett, but the phone with its AI is like making a prediction. It's not actually evaluating the correctness or accuracy. So you have to be careful about what you put in, which we will get to, but you also have to be careful about what you get back as well. So if we could go to the next, oh, we're already on the next slide. So another a use, content creation and creative writing. So you could say to your chat bot or ChatGPT or whatever it is, you could say, write me a poem. And in a way that is, I think, materially different than ever before, it can create something, a poem, song lyrics, a script. And here we've got examples of it. We've asked it to draft poems about weather in Michigan. And if you're from Michigan, you can have some appreciation for how our weather can be kind of all over the place. But it's just really, it's really mind-blowing. And you can even say, oh, do something in the style of Shakespeare or, your favorite author, your favorite songwriter. And it, because of the information it has been trained on, it can do that, and it can do it in a way that it's like never before.
I heard a really unique version of asking generative AI to sing the license agreement as a sad song.
Jeez.
And this plaintive, lovely voice began singing the legal language in a license agreement that was quite melodic and very sad.
Well, and hopefully the license agreement was okay to put into that tool, right? Well,
There's
talk
another one.
about that as well, because once it's in there and being sung about, it's out there. So.
So if we go to the next slide. So this one, it's near and dear to my heart because I do computer science as a hobby. And you do need to be careful with this one because you don't want to reveal your work that's proprietary, because I think Samsung engineers, their employees had a computer science problem they were trying to solve, and they started putting in their initially secret proprietary information into the platforms, not realizing now we have made this information that was once secret no longer secret. So
there are ways to guard against that. So we'll talk about
Yeah.
that later, but it is something, especially when we talk about these free or low cost tools that are out there. Those are the places where you're likely to get in more trouble, although you can get in trouble elsewhere too. But those are the places where you want to be aware, and you want to make sure that your employees are being aware of what happens to data once it is out there.
But if you are trying to do something more generic, like run a loop, whether it's a for loop, a do while loop, or a conditional statement, something more generic, or if you're in Excel and you want to know, oh, how do I add this column to that column? These platforms can be a good resource for those more generic things that don't involve proprietary information that you want to keep secret.
When you're talking about coding, actually, a lot of these applications that you've been talking about, there have been some limitations with the tools we have, well, up until very recently, in terms of the size of what they can handle. So
Mhm.
what's called the token, right? The token window, how big of a request can you throw at these? And we are on the cusp right now of that exploding. So Google has Google Studio where you can go in and you can play around with Gemini 1.5, which as of right now has a 1 million token space. Like you can throw it a 700-page document to summarize, for example, which you can't do with a lower token limit. And that's just what they're making available for free.
Mhm.
They have tweeted recently that, or X, what do you call it? They have put out there that their 5 million token is testing perfectly. So the size of what you can do with coding, for example, with anything really, is about to explode. We're looking at, I think, in the next 6 to 12 months, a whole other revolution that's as big as what it was from going from regular AI to to GPTs. I think we're looking at that size of a revolution going forward, which makes it really fortunate that you guys are learning the basics now, so you have a starting
I
point.
understand, yep.
All right, if we go to the next one. So another use, language translation. So many people, might only speak one or two languages. They might have a situation where they need to go from, language 1 to language 2. So you can go to these platforms and say, oh, could you translate X text into another language? Again, you need to be cautious about what you're putting in, making sure it's not proprietary information. And again, you need to be cautious about what you get back out, especially if you don't speak the language, but it's a great kind of first cut at language translation, especially to kind of get the gist of what you're dealing with.
I think that what's interesting too is it's not just like traditional foreign languages, but empathy, right? I mean, like speaking empathetically is a human skill that I think we're losing over time. And we've become a much more blunt society. And we don't always take the time to inject empathy into what we're doing or saying. And you can now, in any of these models, you can ask for something to be rewritten with more empathy. And I think that's good. I think that's really good. There's a new tool that's kind of in the news right now, Hume, that is taking empathy not just in its output, but in its input. It is learning from tones of voice, what you're saying. It is learning empathy. And while I think it's a little bit, it can be a little bit scary to think about that, right? Because going back to that Turing test, right? It's taking on human emotion, albeit artificially, but it is taking on human emotion and using that on both ends, coming and going. But in the end, I think that tool or something similar is going to end up built into most of these other models. And it's just going to be a part of using AI, our generative AI anyway. And it's going to become more a part of our lives again, and maybe it will reintroduce some empathy, right?
I just thought machines telling us how to live.
Or teaching us.
Teaching. Yeah, yeah.
All right, another use case, image generation, which again is just kind of mind blowing that it can be done. You can give these platforms, you can give it a text prompt. You could say, oh, make me a picture of X, make me a picture of Y, and it can do it. And it's just amazing. And we're going to have some examples here where we ask it to create a logo for a dog walking business called Pup Parade. And again, you have to be careful about your inputs and your outputs, because as you see here, it makes a nice enough image, but it's put an extra P on pup. But one of the great things about it is that we can refine these things over time. So you have your first input, you get an output, you can say, hey, can you refine it a bit? we get a refined image, but then we have two A's and we can refine it again to say, hey, can you make it kind of fancy? And so there's a lot you can do with it, but you always have to be cautious about what you put in, what you get out. You still have to bring human intelligence to bear, especially to make sure you're getting an output that you want.
It would have been so much easier if we could have gone into those images and edited them, right? Which you cannot currently do. But we are told that DALL-E will allow editing in its next iteration, which is, I think, again, another, I hate to say game changer, it's cringe, but it really is. It's a game changer for those who use image creation as their AI use.
So another use case scenario, human resources and automating certain things you're doing in there, recruiting, training, employment development, and performance evaluations. Because of these new systems that we have, you can do things in ways that no single human or even a set of humans could, or at speeds and rates that no human or set of humans could, in the pre-generative AI era.
Yeah, although I point out in terms of employee development and, for example, hiring decisions and HR, New York now has a statute out there that on pointing out that AI cannot be the sole tool.
Right.
At all, because the algorithms have bias.
They come from us.
And the bias comes from us. And so at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you have human oversight over any of these tools with regard to HR.
That's really true of any kind of regulated industry or anywhere where there could be a claim of discrimination, a legal claim of discrimination. You have to be careful about how you're using your AI and where it falls in your overall workflow, and it can't take over. And also, we'll hit on this, I think, in your section later, but there's going to be some requirements that you're keeping track of what you're doing so that can be revisited.
That's important.
And that's especially true in the human resources world. Human resources is one area I can really see that kind of that empathy overlay being an important tool, because if you have to send bad news to some people, it might be good to have a rewrite that is going to cushion whatever blow is coming.
And so another area of use, compliance. So risk assessment and analysis. You might be in an industry where fraud is a very real possibility. You could use generative AI to monitor communications for signs of fraud in a way, again, that no single human or even a group of humans ever could. The AI can be monitoring these, and it could raise red flags with certain combinations of words, phrases, and you could set it up to send you an email when it thinks there's a high probability of fraud, and it could just go right to you. And then that's where you bring your human intelligence to bear to actually then look at it, read it, and assess it. But it's just the level of comprehensiveness and the scope and the speed are just so far beyond what we could do before. And then in addition, sticking with the compliance idea, you might have an employee that has a question about something. And as a starting point, the employee could go to the company chat bot and say, hey, I'm seeing X, I'm seeing Y. Is that a problem? Just to get the employee started. Again, not the end, but it can be a beginning, one tool among many.
So when you say company chatbot, what does that mean? Because we've talked about like Chat GPT and some of these others, but what is a company chatbot?
So a company could partner with, for instance, OpenAI, ChatGPT, to have a version of it, but it's a closed universe, a closed garden just for that company, so that information is not flowing out into the internet to everyone. It could be just inside the company and looking at company resources, rather than when you just go to openai.com, type something in, and that's just gone.
Hopefully it's not the chat bot that we get when we talk to or try to communicate with our cable provider. Would you like to use the chat feature? And I go,
Please no.
Please no.
There's been some interesting missteps using that type of customer interface where their chat interface has gone rogue. So that's also improving, but it is something to be aware of if you're thinking about using this technology for a customer interface or an interface with the public in any way. Test, retest, right?
Yes, definitely, definitely. All right, let's go to the next one here. So these are some of the high-level uses. There are also industry-specific uses, and we're going to look at manufacturing as an example. So suppose you're in the manufacturing industry, you can use this new technology for designing and optimizing, whatever your product might be. So it's, again, I mean, we're really excited about this stuff because it's just so mind-blowing, but you can say to your chat bot or ChatGPT, whatever version of it is that you have, and you could make a whole swath of designs so much faster than, again, the pre-ChatGPT or GPT era could. You could say, hey, here are some parameters, and then give me, 100 prototypes. And then out of those 100 prototypes, you might narrow it down to, 5 or 10, and then you can start refining those again and again and again to really hone in on what you want.
I'm going to break in for a quick second, just because I'm going to throw a plug for our next session of the AI Institute, which is diving deeper into manufacturing use cases and the related considerations, automotive and otherwise. I also just want to quickly point out that when we talked about company chatbots or company, any kind of AI tools, you certainly can develop those internally or working with consultants and such, but there are also off-the-shelf solutions for a lot of these use cases that we're talking about now and others. There's, from anything from smart newsletters, right? Creating smart newsletters is a product you can go out and buy, to a lot of these more technical applications. Someone out there has put a lot of time and money into those.
Yeah, the consideration in some will say, well, why don't I build this myself? Why don't I just do that? And keep in mind that the best results, statistically significant results, are with as much data as you can have. And gathering that data can be difficult and costly and time consuming. I think the original projection when ChatGPT in its earliest form came out, the electricity alone to do that, they said, would power 121 homes for a full year. That was the electricity that was pulled to do that work. Massive amounts of data, massive amounts of time. So companies say, well, why don't I just figure this out myself? Well, okay.
Right. So for some simple use cases that we've talked about, you can go, like you
Yes.
can go to OpenAI and find a whole list of GPTs that other people have developed, other users have developed that may get you where you're going for some use cases. But when you're getting very specific around your company's core business, you have to start looking at other solutions
And
other than.
that was a nice segue, Angela, because the manufacturing next segment that we're going to be doing will really dive into deeply this
Absolutely.
aspect of it. So, Baron.
Just a few other things about manufacturing, kind of high level. Another area would be looking at your supply chain and optimizing it. So you might use their GPT, whichever one you get, to look at like every single decision point, bring all that data in and figure out, oh, we've got a backlog here. This part's slowing me down. And it's just so amazing how it can help you see patterns and forecasts and really figure things out in a way that you never could before, or figure them out faster and in a more accurate way compared to before. So that's another area in manufacturing that could be helpful. I mean, that's not limited to manufacturing, but let's see, we go to the next one. Oh, you already did. You're way ahead of me. Quality control and inspection. So again, your company is making products, you can use the generative AI to analyze and look at each product and evaluate it and assess it in a way that no human or set of humans could. Again, it's not the end of the process. It's not the only part of the process, but it can raise the red flags and say, hey, we need to look at item 74327. And then you have your human bring intelligence to bear about that because, it's still a computer. Of course, it can make mistakes, but it can help you identify potential mistakes faster and in a more comprehensive way. And then last one I'll talk about is prediction. And so I suppose many of you probably been on Amazon and somehow Jeff Bezos knows, oh, this person is going to want this product. So I'll just happen to have it here so that it can get to me in one day or maybe 2 days. And that's probably because they're gobbling up all this data, putting it into the GPTs and figuring out the likelihood that a given customer or set of customers are going to want something so they can figure out which facilities geographically it needs to be at and where to be able to meet that predicted need.
And that's really fascinating, Barrett, because and this occurred some years ago where financial loan institutions were looking at the shopping behavior of prospective individuals looking for loans, not based on their financial ability necessarily, but what they were buying from whom. So it's a vast trove of data there that allows those kinds of interesting predictions that you would otherwise not think would have any bearing
That's
on
right.
a loan decision.
And those troves of data are
for sale.
so they are for sale, and they're very valuable in this space. Amazon, as an example, the companies that are staying at the top in the AI industries are those that have data, right? They have their own data. They have a lot of data.
Although I would point out, and it's sort of a different topic, but those data brokers are being regulated, including draft legislation in Michigan. It exists in Vermont, it exists in California, it's coming. And so I have also heard from various sources that data brokers are trying to do as much as they can, as quickly as they can, because they know that's going to be regulated and no more can we gather that information without consent. Oh dear.
Which is a great segue into Claudia's section that she's going to talk to us about understanding risks.
Risks, there are many. So don't enter into this lightly. Be prepared for, example, in terms of the collection of data, we have privacy concerns. Did you get the consent of the individual? If you're going out and inadvertently reproducing or gathering data for the training, intellectual property, which is rampant, copyright. We mentioned that earlier about the idea of OpenAI and Google using YouTube videos, using podcasts, converting that to text and using that to train their large language models. We have lawsuits pending with major book authors and publishers saying, this is my copyrighted stuff. You can't use it without a license. So there are tremendous intellectual property risks. It's important to realize in a publicly open AI arena, if you're using it, that to understand the potential data that you access for these decisions may have copyright protection associated with it. So be aware of that. I mean, what we used to do back in the day, right? When you got language and said, that looks slightly familiar. And you put it around quotes and throw it into Google and you find out that it was something that you wrote and someone else is using in an agreement. Oh, well, okay. But we expect that as lawyers when we see our own words coming back at us in pleadings and briefs and so forth. But this is a little different when we're talking about intellectual property. You mentioned the Samsung, the source code, the engineers putting the source code to figure out the bugs. Ooh, there goes the trade secret. It's out there. So be very careful. We talked about bias and fairness and employment decisions. Again, you cannot make employment decisions solely with AI, given that inherent potential bias. So that's where human oversight in all these things is really important. You're going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that, so these risks, they're not just risks that you need to keep in mind if you're thinking of adopting AI or generative AI at a company level. Your employees are
Oh, yeah.
probably playing around with ChatGPT, probably the free version, without you knowing it. And have you thought about what policies you have in place or need to have in place to make sure that those trade secrets are being protected, for example, or client data is being protected or information is being protected? It's just, that's, there's so many levels of risk here that need to be managed. And they do need to be managed. I mean, this isn't something that's going away,
No,
right?
it's not.
It's here to stay.
And to the Samsung point, I mean, after the fact, they have a policy. Okay, well, that's a little late. So it's really important to understand not only your business, your company, your employees have a policy that is not the, no, never, but okay, what do we do? What's our use case? Where can we most effectively use generative AI? And how can that help us? How can we use that? So it's really important to understand the use case. It's also really important to identify what the potential risks are for that use. Where are your crown jewels? What are the things that are really proprietary? Where are the risks? Where are the competitors? Really understanding that, because understanding all of those. And the other really important part in all of this, and this is sort of my sweet spot of terror, security. Generative AI systems can be susceptible to adversarial attacks and risks. The bad guys are out there playing with this as much as we are. So they're out there using it in ways that create a more sophisticated phishing email that will go through and find, talk about large language models. Look at what's on the dark web. Imagine a large language scraping of all the information on the dark web and coming up with some really key and focused phishing attacks or the injection of software, of code. We have the deep fakes, the example that has been out there for some time of the Southeast Asia, where the individual was invited to a meeting, a video meeting, and all the people in the meeting that had the faces and images of his colleagues were in fact deep fakes, threat actors who suggested that he'd make some financial moves on behalf of the company, which is what his position was there to do. And $26 million floated out to the threat actors. We have rampant misinformation that's going on. And it's not just, the adults that are using it, it's the kids that are using it without fully developed frontal lobes that are just playing around and doing crazy things. So there are risks everywhere. Data poisoning, another thing where AI models can be vulnerable to the injection of bad code. And that can be certainly have horrible consequences. Then we get into regulatory, and this is interesting because the recent stuff that has come out of the FTC with AI washing, we all remember back in the day, let's see, 30, 50 years ago, Earth Day. I know we were alive, Angela, not so much Barrett. But there were claims made by marketing departments about how green, how eco they were. Now we have AI washing. And marketing departments, no offense to the marketing folks in the crowd, but be careful what you promote, because if you over promote or go beyond what is accurate and real, the FTC is looking for those companies who are doing that AI washing, and they will find you, and they have guidance out there to do that. The other kinds of interesting things in terms of risks are the theft of models and proprietary models that pose significant IP loss and competitive risk. And then authentication and access control. Again, only authorized users should be able to use these tools, particularly as you are deploying them in critical applications in your company. Now, I will say that in terms of the cybersecurity, one of the very cool potential uses talking about mind-numbing tasks of looking through things. And I know, you've appreciated this with logging, when you look at log files and coding and in discovery. But looking at log files in a data breach can take days and looking for significant IP addresses. Here's an area where generative AI could be extremely useful. And then data management and governance. So the last couple of components here, you have to keep in mind that data quality, lineage, significant logistical challenges in terms of data management and governance. So understand that risk. That sort of goes to the comment that I made about if you want to do this on your own. It's really, really difficult because you also have to have the awareness of the data that you are scraping. Do you own it? Does someone else own it? Do you have a license for it? I mean, one of the interesting things that was pointed out in Google scraping YouTube was, well, we own YouTube, so do you have a license? Have you gotten the license? Did you look at the terms? I mean, they're just really, this technology is so interesting and so exciting, that these kinds of very ordinary risks that we deal with as lawyers all the time sometimes can be the last thing that somebody wants to think about, but they should. So what's next?
So you think generative AI might be useful for your business? What are you going to do from that awakening moment? Well, we're going to give you some high level guidance in terms of what you need to do. And a lot of it is repetitive of what we've talked about here organically during the session. But really, the number one thing, the first thing you have to start out with is you have to identify your use cases. What is it that you actually want your AI tools to accomplish? Is it content creation? Is it data analysis? Is it a bunch of things? Then you need to rank them. What's your most critical use cases? And you can be aspirational in this, because I will tell you that use cases I would have been dreaming about 6 months ago are in the reality now. And that's going to continue happening. So be aspirational when you're thinking about what you would really love, what would help your business the most, what use cases would be great. And then you also need to be thinking about all of the pieces that we talked about today, the ethical pieces, the business requirements, data privacy considerations, integration with how your business works and the other technology you have. You need to get all those on paper, right at the outset. Put those and your preferred use cases together, because that is the bare minimum that you need before you can responsibly start down the path of considering adoption. Once you know those things, you can start doing market research. You can start looking at what kind of pre-built AI platforms are out there that might meet your needs. For some of your use cases, it's unlikely that any one tool is going to meet all of your use cases. So at some point, you're going to be faced with trying to decide which of your use cases are requirements and which ones are more optional, and trying to match up, unless you just want to have a big stable of AI tools, which is fine. But you're going to be looking at both commercial offerings as kind of the solutions you can purchase, or open source projects may be fine for some of the use cases, especially kind of some of those, I think, rote administrative style tasks that can be taken over by very simple GPTs that are either already existing or can be developed by anyone who's not scared of technology. Really, you don't have to be a coder to be able to make a GPT.
That's right.
Develop a GPT.
Yeah.
It's very easy, actually. And you can go to OpenAI to find out more on that. So once you have those data points in front of you, you're going to be looking at you're going to be involving your IT people for sure.
Absolutely.
Your data people. I should actually take a step back, because this is not a one person job. Everything we're talking about here requires a group of stakeholders working together.
And not to plug lawyers, but I'm going to plug
Okay.
lawyers. They're really important to involve in this
They are.
process because of the legal risks. Again, we've mentioned IP a lot, trade secrets,
Yep.
confidentiality, data privacy, all of those things. So please, please, please involve your counsel.
Absolutely. The risks, you want to be able to say you at least considered them before coming up with solutions. You don't want to be blindsided by the risks after the fact. Work with people who are trained to identify those risks and trained to mitigate those risks. That includes attorneys. There are also consultants out there that you can work with in the AI field who can help you with some of that. Certainly can help you in terms of identifying what tools might be compatible with your existing IT framework. Yeah,
You know, and if it's something that you're on a confidential project, you
Yes.
might consider retaining counsel to maintain that
That's right.
confidentiality. Because this is something that you may not want to have be discoverable.
That's true. So, meaning if there's communications with your counsel about certain things that is shielded by privilege, right? Confidentiality, it's not going to be disclosed as readily or possibly not at all in court if something were to happen down the road. So use attorneys for what they're there for.
Likely.
Yes, exactly. And so you're going to have that. You're going to have your IT, your technical, you're going to have your legal component there. Hopefully you're going to have those people, you identified use cases, and hopefully you did that involving the people who will be using. So you have them involved. You have HR involved. You should have HR involved. You're going to need to be considering policy changes throughout to make sure that the company is using AI wisely.
Right, and in addition to IT, make sure that there's sufficient security
Yep.
awareness with your IT. A lot of IT departments are not focused necessarily on the larger issues of security and data protection. So that's an important group to add to that as well.
That's right. And that's assuming that you have groups, right? An
Yes.
IT group. If you have an IT person who is already overwhelmed just dealing with, your day to day, that's probably not going to be sufficient to get you to move the ball forward in a group like this. You will probably need to bring in some outside resources to work with your internal resources and to keep things moving forward and to hit all of these points that we're talking about today. Scalability, that's really any technology you're thinking about adapting. That's an important consideration, and this is no exception to that. Evaluate legal, ethical, and regulatory compliance. So again, that's going to be involving your legal component to your team to think about the things that we talked about today, that Claudia hit on in particular with the data privacy, with things like protecting sensitive information, biases, and how those can play out in ways that are problematic. Depending on what industry you're working in or what kind of customers you have, there are various regulatory compliance needs that you will have that you must be considering upfront. So you're going to involve those people as well to make sure that whatever solution it is you are evaluating meets those industry-specific regulation requirements.
Yeah, and you mentioned ethics and privacy, and although we would love everyone to come to us for legal work, when you're talking to other outside counsel or have questions about that, it's really important to make sure they understand the technology.
Yes.
There are ethical obligations that we have to not only be competent in the technology, and here's an important one, for your outside law firm to communicate when they're using AI. If it has a material impact on the representation, that needs to be communicated. And to maintain the confidentiality. So, I mean, this goes, again, we are aware of this, but for those who may use other attorneys, it's really important to have those ethical obligations understood.
Right. Well, and to talk through when you do actually need to make that disclosure, because as we started off with, AI has been around for
A long time.
a very long time, and it is an integral part of how attorneys practice law.
They're non-lawyers. There's an ethical obligation to supervise
Well,
non-lawyers.
that's true as well. That's a whole different can of worms. But but the point being that generative AI, where it is actually generating
Yes.
content, is different than old AI where it's kind of learning and helping you categorize. So is there an obligation to disclose the older AI? I don't believe so, no. Is there an obligation to disclose if things are being generated
Like a brief.
like a brief, yeah, well, anything. If you're actually generating content from the AI, then there's a lot more there that needs to be considered in terms of disclosures and how those will be made and what's sufficient. And those aren't just legal decisions either. Those are also business decisions. And so you want to make sure you're involving the people who are going to be answering to the clients if they call upset that you know they weren't aware that their advertisements were being generated by AI and they're very angry because somebody noticed that there are 7 fingers.
Yes.
Right? So those are, again, it's why it's important to go through this evaluation process and to involve everybody, all the stakeholders in that. The need for human oversight. So AI is not a replacement for humans. AI changes how work gets done. And so it moves your human resources, your people, around a bit. It shuffles where their focus is. They're not going to be focused maybe on doing some of the rote work I talked about before. Instead, maybe what they're focusing on is validating output or validating input for these AI models, polishing, making sure that we stay within the rails. Empathy, that's right, all of those things. So there's some shuffling that's going to be there, but there will always be the need for human oversight, even as we are moving to even larger data sets, which is kind of minimizing the risk of hallucinations and some of those other errors. They're still there and they will always be there no matter how large the data set. So you have to be looking for that. You don't want to be the lawyer who was citing cases that ChatGPT made up, complete with citations and quotations that looked very authentic. He submitted them to the court. The court could not find them, and that was a big problem. You don't want to be that person. So human oversight. You're always going to be validating and modifying really what's coming out of these tools to make them the most valuable assets possible for your company or for your goals, your needs. Policy considerations, we kind of hit on some of these before, but you need those internal policies about what your employees are going to be permitted to do with your company assets or with that includes your clients' information and data. If you're in construction, information about your suppliers, right, is going to be important, or contract details will be important. So what are you doing to protect those? Put it in a policy. If you want to have as an outset, while you're getting your arms around all of this, in the interim, having a policy in place where there's a need for permission. It can be a very simple policy along those lines. You can't use your work email address or anything with your work domain to sign up for these kinds of tools. You cannot use them on a company device without permission, and then lay out the steps for permission, right? Pending the outcome of all of this work.
Right, and the importance there in terms of those getting permission to understand how it works.
That's right. That's right. So those policies, it's not just the internal ones, it is also outward facing ones. Like Claudia mentioned, do we have an obligation to disclose to clients or customers or others that are going to be consuming whatever is generated by these generative AI tools? All of those are things that need to be evaluated as a part of evaluating adoption of any of these possible tools. I had a hard time deciding where to put in proof of concept or pilot testing, because really it's this whole process is not linear. So, right. So, and you're going to return to each of these steps as you're going through and finding things that work and don't work. But proof of concept, pilot testing, before you go all in and roll something out, then make sure you have a pilot test, a smaller group, where you have you have put down what your goal is. What is your goal here? What is it that you're trying to do? You have benchmarked how it's already being done, right? And so and you define what is success going to look like so that you can measure those things and have something to come back and evaluate with. So that is, you need to do that before the pilot testing and during the pilot testing, and then go back and actually evaluate those results and look and see, okay, if what you've done is no more than shift the, where you're spending time, but you're not saving time. Has the tool accomplished what you needed it to, what you set out as your primary use case, your primary objective? If it's not giving you value there, I don't think you're going to want to spend money on it. So it's important to see if it actually follows through in reality the way that you hoped it would when you were doing these evaluations. So, maybe your proof of concept comes back and tells you, nope, this is not a situation where we can use something that is off the shelf. So you're going to evaluate considering a custom build, custom development. And that is something that can be done. It is done. It can be extremely expensive. So yeah, try to evaluate those other tools first is my suggestion, unless you have a lot of money and you just know immediately what it is that you need and you're willing to pay for it. That's fine as well. But customizing existing platforms is kind of the middle ground that I think a lot of companies are landing on, but you're going to have to make those that evaluation at some point in this process. And I hope that you're able to find something that already exists. If you're going to actually go about building your own platform, everything we've talked about here amplifies. You're going to have a much larger process.
And to that point, there are so many companies that are doing this right
There
now. I talked to a startup this morning dealing with AI, and there are, that's just this morning. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, it's everywhere, it's every day. There's a tremendous amount of money being poured into
That's
this.
right.
So you really have opportunities if you're wanting something like this to vet it and vet it very carefully.
And I will add, so if you're looking at those kind of solutions that are pre-built, especially cloud-based ones, what happens, and include this in your assessment, what happens if that company folds and they put a sunset date on there? What's happening to your data? What's happening to everything else? So that's part of, where is it? That's right. Know that up front. So that's part of all of that. And that's also, reviewing and planning for the future. That's something that has to happen throughout. That can never end. Once you introduce AI is already introduced into your business, whether you know it or not. It's there. So from now on out, you are continuously needing to evaluate and adjust so that you're making sure that you are respecting your business goals and you are incorporating technological advancements to your benefit. I will say this is not something that every person is going to be able to do, right? So, but you need to be cultivating a culture where people who can do these things are doing these things, where you're welcoming them to come to you with these, feedback and maybe requiring feedback. I know, especially during the pilot testing, that's probably something that you're going to want to require.
And look at the terms of use in those test cases. I mean, it's not, and I say that because many of these platforms might have been built a year ago.
That's right.
And there are 5 states, now soon to be 8, with privacy and data protection legislation in place that require consent before the information of individuals can be used. So you don't want to get in a situation where you are one of multiple parties that are subject to a lawsuit.
That's right.
So just be very careful.
This is the process that we talked about today, and I haven't even got to the kind of training and full adoption once you've gotten through the evaluation process, but that entire process, it takes time. If it's done well, it takes time. And the reality of this particular industry is that in that time, things have changed. From the time you started to the time that you are thinking about a pilot group, there's new technology out there. The
States
old
are
technology has
adopting
changed.
laws,
There are
including
laws. Yep.
AI.
That's
And
right.
if you're not aware of that,
Yep.
you can run afoul of
There
that.
are new regulatory guidelines that are constantly rolling out on this, and that will not stop. That is picking up speed. We have courts. If you're an attorney like we are, we have courts now who have standing orders on what needs to be disclosed about the use of generative AI. Well, actually, they're not even making that distinction. AI. They need to make that distinction.
Yeah.
Please walk away, if you learn nothing else from this, walk away with the understanding that not all AI is generative AI. Not all AI carries the same risks as generative AI. So it doesn't need to all be lumped together. And none of it should paralyze you with fear, right? None of it should. The generative AI, it is an amazing tool. I'm so excited that I've been practicing law and able to embrace this at this point in our history of technology, right? This is a really exciting time, and your competitors are embracing this. So you have to. You cannot just put your head in the sand and hope it goes away. It is not going away. Just do it responsibly, and don't be paralyzed by fear. Just mitigate, right? That's the lawyer in me talking. So
We do.
that's what we do. So once you've gone through that process and you actually have selected your tools and you've worked to implement them, you really need to spend the time and the money on solid training, because it's not going to do you any good if those tools are sitting there and they're not being used to their full advantage, or they're not being used at all, or they're being used incorrectly. So not only wouldn't that be to your advantage, but it could really put you into hot water, because then we get back into the situation of, if you're not being trained on what to do and what not to do, and trained very well on that, you're putting your data at risk again. So you then also need to be, at the time of implementation, you already have to be thinking about change management. You already have to be putting into place how you're going to not just facilitate that technology throughout your entire company now, but how you're going to be, what's next, what you're going to be doing next. Because again, these technologies are changing, and you're going to be chasing after it and not the other way
It's not a one-and-done
around.
deal in
That's
terms of
right.
training either. I mean,
No,
change
no.
management includes humans.
That's right. All of this includes humans, more humans than you would think.
Yeah.
So that's, I hope that we've done a good job of giving the basic groundwork of what generative AI is, what it is not, what some of the key considerations are when you're thinking about using generative AI for your personal use, what the key considerations are, and what the processes might be when evaluating and adopting generative AI tools for your business. I hope that you will join us for our next session of our AI Institute, which will be looking deeper into AI uses and considerations in manufacturing, including automotive. Since we're in Detroit, that's a big part of our lives. And if you have any questions at all about the contents of our presentation today, or about anything generative AI or other, please feel free to reach out and contact myself, Claudia, or Barrett. Our contact information is here on this last slide, and you can also find us at butzel.com, along with all of our colleagues who also, many of them are deep into this world with us.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
So we look forward to speaking with you about any of your AI needs or your other legal needs. And any last words, Claudia,
No,
Barrett?
I think this has been instructive for all of us. It's always wonderful to be part of these things, because you end up learning from one another. But we invite you again to ask questions that you have. Our contact information is there. And we look forward to having this continue.
Thank you.